The January episode of For Immediate Release is coming right up with a look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, much of which is pretty grim, and a lot of the issues with trust can be tied to disinformation, which now can be purchased at scale. We'll look at the trends in media, journalism, and technology for 2022. A couple big social media services are about to launch some copycat features cribbed from competitors. What does it mean to be authentic in a virtual world? Maybe not what you think. And organized labor in the U.S. is having a moment, which should cause internal communicators to consider how they can help their employers stay union-free, or, more likely, communicate effectively with unionized employees. In his tech report, Dan York talks about Twitter Spaces, new life for Tumblr, a couple services testing subscriptions, and how could we have an episode of FIR without talking about NFTs? It's all coming your way right this very minute on For Immediate Release. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 220 of For Immediate Release with me, Neville Hobson.
And this is Shel Holtz, and this is our first full-length episode of the year. So if you haven't listened to one of the shorter episodes, Happy New Year to you all, and Happy New Year, Neville.
And likewise.
A couple announcements before we jump into the stories that we're reporting this month. First, a new Circle of Fellows is up. This is the monthly podcast where I moderate a panel with 4, sometimes 5, IABC fellows on topics of interest to communicators. This time around, the topic was adding value through communication, and the panelists were Priya Bates, Stephanie Griffiths from South Africa, Cindy Schmieg, and Jim Schaefer. So that's up on the FIR Podcast Network. It was a good hour-long conversation. You can watch the YouTube video replay or listen to the podcast.
Excellent. So speaking of podcasts, we started our short episodes at the beginning of the year. You might remember us discussing that in the last full-length show. So I tend to refer to them as the short-form episode, and this is the long-form episode. It'll settle down to people who know what we're talking about, but the short-form ones are less than 15 minutes each. They're a really handy size for those of you who tell us now and again that, can we do the show a bit shorter? Hey, we have one for you. So we've done 5 so far, averaging roughly 1 or 2 a week in addition to the regular monthly show. So we've done 5, starting with our 2022 Trends Report that we recorded around about the new year. We've done one on us joining the Marketing Podcast Network. That's Jason Full's initiative. There are 15 shows, I think it's now 16, including FIR, that are in that network. And by the way, just to be clear, it doesn't have any effect on how we're doing the show via the FIR Podcast Network. So reassure you can get your podcast, continue to get your podcast wherever you normally get it. So we've done that. We talked about NFTs and what the Associated Press is doing with their NFT marketplace. That's an intriguing development in the NFT space. We talked about Disney auditioning TikTok creators. That was an interesting one. And by the way, the numbering of these follow on from those. So I've described so far episode 215, 216, 217, and 218. That's the Disney one. And the latest we did a few days ago was FIR 219, talking about, again, NFTs. This is a hot topic. And what a big retailer in the UK, Selfridges, is doing in their flagship store in London, with an NFT marketplace where you can buy your NFTs along with the blouses and trousers and socks and things that you might normally buy at Selfridges and pay with your credit card. So this is a big step. So those 5 are up. We've got a couple more coming soon in this week. So in between the monthly long ones, you've got your choices of short ones to listen to. It's pretty good stuff, isn't it, Shel? I mean, there's some great topics that lend themselves well to a 10 to 15-minute chat, right?
Yeah, and I like the ability to confine our discussion to just one topic. It's a nice change.
Yeah, it is. And that's important to mention. Just one topic we'll talk about. So give them a try. You can find the details of that on the FIR website. I want to give you all an update very briefly on the FIR listener survey that we launched at the end of December that runs out on January the 30th. So if you haven't taken it yet, you've still got time. Some interesting metrics to share on this. No serious surprises at all yet, I don't think. And we will be sharing all the results once the survey closes. But some interesting ones to mention. So, for instance, how often do you listen? We asked one of the big questions. And half of the people who've responded so far, 50%, said they listen to every single episode. And these are the monthlies, by the way, because we did this before, or we launched the survey before we started the short form editions. So it is quite interesting how this works. How do people listen to the podcast? Many people use multiple. So the question really was, which one do you use most? And 75% of people said they listen on a smartphone using a podcast app. So mobile device is the primary method. Do you listen all in one go? 50% said yes, they do. And the other 50% was split between pausing, only part, and so a good number, half, listen constantly without pausing. We had some other metrics to share that you find quite interesting, I think. What kind of stories was a question we asked, which topics interest you most? And I found it most interesting where the top two responses to the list we gave by a large margin to the others were new technologies for communicators and communication trends. Those are the two topics that resonated most with the survey respondents, totaling over 50% of the response just on those two. That's kind of interesting. And there's lots in here. I'm not going to share all of them. We asked 29 questions, but to give you a flavor of what people were saying, one other one just to throw out there is, do you listen to any other shows on the FIR podcast network? And this will interest you, Shell. The second most listened to show, guess what? FIR interviews.
How about that?
So that's interesting, and we've got one or two in the pipeline to share once we get those done. So I'm glad to know that. So
we need to start promoting some of the other shows during FIR, like EE Voice for you internal communicators. You'll love it.
Yeah, also FIR B2B, that's worth a listen as well. So
absolutely,
the Agency Leader Podcast, Spin Sucks, Thought Leader Life, Inside PR. You've got lots of chats with Chip. So yeah, go and check them out. There's some really good shows that really, really are good. So, and also just one other thing I just want to throw out there. We've got our listeners who responded. We're definitely a male audience at Shell. It's a big proportion of listeners are male, 58%. We've got some smart people in our listener group that the majority, by a large number, 57%, have a master's or PhD degree. So smart people are listeners. The vast majority of you are in the US and Canada. That's no surprise there, 75% based on the numbers we've got in so far. So, hey, all you folks in Europe and the UK, go and take the survey, please, to get our numbers up a bit to show the reality of who's listening.
Manipulating the data, are we?
Right, yeah, so it looks that way, doesn't it? So this closes on January the 30th, and sometime in February, probably in the February edition of the long-form show, the one you're listening to, we'll be sharing a bit more about that, and we'll be publishing it on the website as well.
So please get out there and take that survey. We really value your opinion and plan to weave the results into the approach we take to the show in the future.
Yeah, we will. So we're going to get on and talk about the things that we are here today to talk about. And we've got some great stuff here, starting with the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer, the findings from that. This was published just a few days ago. So Edelman published I think it's the 22nd year, or 21st or 22nd year.
22nd. Right,
22nd year of the Edelman Trust Barometer. And I can remember when the very first one came out. That was quite something. There wasn't anything really like it at the time. But the Edelman Trust Barometer, the clue is in the word trust here, measures trust across a wide spectrum of audiences. And indeed, they interview people. 36,000 people they interviewed in 28 countries for this one. And numbers are sort of in that area every year. So it's not some casual thing. This is quite depth, conducted during the whole of November 2021 by Edelman's folks in the various offices in those countries. So this is a big operation for Edelman. So what has appeared in this one? I think it's no surprise. if I read out the headline, it was in Edelman's press release. This actually will be quite interesting. Or the big headline on their website for the press release: 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer reveals even greater expectations of business to lead as government trust continues to spiral. And their subheading is "Government and Media Fuel a Vicious Cycle of Distrust." So it's almost a sense of the year of distrust and mistrust comes across in that quite clearly. But there's interesting things in here, and we can only really devote time to a snippet of this, give a feeling of some of the top-level numbers that they're talking about. And a lot of reporting about this, as you can imagine. The one I found easiest to digest, which I'm going to reference mostly today, is published by the World Economic Forum on the 18th of January. It's quite well done. They talk about 2/3 of people surveyed are inclined to distrust organizations. And according to Edelman, they're saying this could impact attempts to tackle COVID-19 and climate change. These are huge topics. Nevertheless, that's significant. Scientists are the most trusted in society, they say, and government leaders are the least trusted. There are 4 forces at work, which I'll come to in a second. My employer, it's an interesting one, that according to this, and we visited that before, my employer, as well as my employee, if you like, is now the most trusted of any institution at 77%. So your employer, the company you work for. Workers expect CEOs to be the face of change, Edelman says. But distrust has become society's default emotion, they say, with 60% of people inclined to distrust until they see evidence something is trustworthy, which could hamper progress on tackling global challenges, including climate change, as I mentioned earlier. So these are some of the findings out of this. And looking a little more closely at some of these, it's kind of interesting. Government was the most trusted institution as recently as May 2020. That's Richard Edelman, the CEO of Edelman, quoted in the press release, when the world sought leadership capable of tackling a global pandemic. Now, after the confused and bungled response when it comes to basic competence, government is less trusted than businesses and NGOs. People still want government to take on the big challenges, but only 4 in 10 say government can execute and get results. That's not good. So these 4 forces I mentioned earlier that the World Economic Forum talk about are interesting. Government media distrust spiral being one of them. Those 2 organization areas are seen as dividing forces, while businesses and NGOs are seen as unifying forces. 2/3 of people are convinced they're being lied to by journalists, heads of government, and business leaders, and that's a pretty bleak landscape if that is really what this survey is showing. The second force, excessive reliance on business. That might sound a bit at odds with what we're saying about businesses being the chance to lead, but you've got to take it in the context of the overall research here. Respondents want business to play a bigger role in climate change, economic inequality, workforce reskilling, and racial injustice. Every stakeholder group expects business to lean in, with nearly 60% of consumers buying brands based on values, and nearly 2/3 of employees asking companies to take a public stand on issues. These are giant topics, frankly, I think. The third, mass class divide. The global pandemic has widened the fissure that surfaced in the wake of the Great Recession, says Edelman. High-income earners have become more trusting of institutions, while lower-income earners have become increasingly wary. And there's a class divide, without any doubt. And the final one, failure of leadership. Communications from my employer are now the most trusted source of information, with social media feeds the least trusted. So the employer is the most trusted source of information. That's pretty significant, it seems to me. And so there's lots in here, including Edelman's view on how to rebuild trust where we are in a climate of such distrust. It will require institutions to provide factual information that breaks the cycle of distrust, while leaders must focus on bringing people together on common ground issues and on long-term thinking and making clear progress on areas of concern. I mean, that surely should have been the case for years, because this topic is not a new topic in 2022. This area of distrust has been growing for at least the past 5 or 6 years. So we're seeing this kind of recommendation still. Facing these myriad challenges will require both a new way of operating and a much higher level of performance from our core institutions, says Edelman. Governments must finally gain control over the pandemic on a global basis. The media needs to get back to a business model that replaces outrage with sobriety, clickbait with calm authority. NGOs have an invaluable role to play on climate change and the last mile on the pandemic. So that's a real brief overview of the top level issues here. And I know there's lots to unpack in this show, but what's your thinking leading to?
Yeah, we could spend the entire episode just on the 2022 Edelman Trust Barometer. I think for a perspective that matters to communicators, the main thing is that business is the most trusted institution. Employees trust what they hear from their organizations more than any other source. They trust their own CEOs, and this puts a lot on the shoulders of the CEO and the organization. The ability of the organization to share quality information. I mean, look at some of the data that was buried in the full report, not in the summary. 57% of respondents worry about experiencing prejudice or racism. So what does that mean to the organization? We need to talk openly about DEI and our obligation as an organization and what we are doing and what we expect of our managers and our employees, and to let employees carry that back out into their relationships in the world. I think this is where business has an opportunity to make a business. You mentioned the data that 6 in 10 say their default tendency is to distrust something until they see evidence it's trustworthy. I liked the label on that before they got into the detail. They said distrust is now society's default emotion. And again, I think it is the obligation of business to say it is on us to do something about this because we're the ones that people tend to trust. Now, every year when this comes out, I do a summary for the executive leadership of the company where I work. And I don't talk much about the political information that's in there, just sharing what is context for what's business related. But I can share a few of the things that I passed along to leaderships. The leadership of our organization, trust of CEOs rose 1% to 49%. You mentioned scientists are most trusted. Coworkers are also highly trusted at 74%. And while CEO trust is generally under 50%, trust in my CEO rose 3%. And that's despite the fact that 57% of respondents said business isn't doing well on their pandemic response. 67% of people believe journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things they know are false or are gross exaggerations. And that's an 8-point increase from last year. 66% believe that about my country's government leaders, and 63% believe it about business leaders, up 7 points. But interestingly, that's business in general, not the organization I work for. That's almost like saying everybody in Congress is a scoundrel except my district, where I vote for the same person over and over and over again. Trust has grown more local. How people feel about their neighbors and coworkers has increased significantly, while trust from others, right, from other countries or who live in other states or provinces or regions has declined. 53% of respondents believe that capitalism as it exists today does more harm than good. 33% believe centralized economies do a better job than free market economies. And it goes on from there. But the one that really jumped out at me and that I highlighted is the fact that CEOs are expected to inform policy, not politics. For example, 54% expect CEOs to inform and shape conversation and policy debates about jobs and the economy. The response rate is similar for CEOs talking about technology and automation and wage inequality, and it drops a bit, but not much, when it comes to global warming and climate change and prejudice and discrimination. So again, a lot for communicators to digest here in counseling leadership of the organization and helping to craft the communication so that it's relevant to the business, but still puts that stake in the ground that people are expecting business to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because one of the things that caught my attention as well in this, which I didn't mention in my summary, but this is the time to mention it based on what you've said. A quote from Richard Edelman in the report or in the press release: government failure has created an over-reliance on business to fill the void, a job that private enterprise was not designed to deliver. And to me, the question from that is, how does that fit then? If government is simply not living up to its responsibilities as government, as the leadership of a country, and businesses are kind of filling the gap. Is there a risk, therefore, that businesses are devoting time and energy to something that they're not designed to do at the expense of building their business? And how do you deal with that? I mean, does that have consequence?
That's a fascinating question. And I think that is something that communicators and business leaders are going to have to sit down and think about hard and long. We have to find a way to make those dovetail, right? We have to find a way to make that outsized expectation of the role that business can play in society fit with the achievement of company goals and, revenue expectations and the like. There has to be a way. The fact that we haven't been built for that before doesn't mean that we can't reconfigure somehow to make those work together.
Yeah, that's my view as well. And I think, again, this could be too negative a viewpoint. Maybe I'm wearing my dystopian glasses too much these days. But looking at the landscape around us, you look at governments. I look at the government here in the UK, which is, the word comes to my mind is not a new phrase, a lame duck government with all the scandals that they're trying to go through, never mind manage the pandemic and so forth. I look at the US. Parties. Right, yeah. I mean, I look at, and the Prime Minister, no one told him it wasn't a work do.
No one told him.
Gee whiz. So then I look at the US, which is where people tend to look to for leadership in many areas to do with issues that affect all of us around the world, and we're seeing weakness there. You've got hovering in the wings this bloke who was the previous president. What's his name? Mr. Trump. Is that going to have an impact on that? You hear about the polarization still over there. We haven't quite got that in most European countries yet, or if there are, it's on a much smaller scale. So I guess we're looking at a fragmented landscape of utter distrust around the world, except, by the way, another survey I saw recently in authoritarian countries where trust in government is very high, and not the obvious suspects like China and North Korea. I mean, there are others too in the Middle East.
Right. So, I think it's important to remember what trust is. It doesn't mean good, right? It means you're going to do what you say you're going to do. We trust you to have integrity. Again, that's not a positive word. It just means that you're going to do what you say you do. And I think an authoritarian isn't trying to hide anything. They tell you exactly what's what. And you go, yep, I think that you're telling the truth. I hate it, but you're telling the truth.
So it looks then that businesses, enterprise, private enterprise, organizations of this type, probably NGOs as well, are going to have to continue stepping into the void to fill the void that government isn't doing. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, the response that I have gotten so far from the leaders that I shared this with where I work was, wow, is this depressing? So... and it's up to us, I think, to start to try to turn things around, do what we can. Somebody has to, and business is in the best position. So our second story is a natural follow-on to our conversation about the trust barometer because it is about misinformation and disinformation. I am getting an increasing amount of content about that in my news feeds, and one that recently crossed my feeds from a company called Plotlights. This is an independent software as a service company that does work specifically for PR and communication teams, which I thought was interesting all by itself. The headline on this post was, "Disinformation as a Service is the next big threat for communicators." Okay, I clicked to read that one, and the first line of the article said, "Misinformation, propaganda, rumors at scale." Mm-hmm. Oh boy. This article addresses what they define as the weaponizing of disinformation. Just as software as a service is a distribution model that gives you access to centrally hosted software for a fee, disinformation as a service, or DaaS, works in basically the same way. You buy a disinformation campaign. There are hackers for hire, lying for a price, mistruths in bulk, the article says. This all happens on the dark web. I'm confident that most of our listeners are familiar with the dark web, but for those who aren't, these are hidden sites that you can't find through conventional browsers. There's a company called Dark Owl. They're a dark web monitoring and intelligence company. Noted that a number of Ukrainian and Russian-speaking disinformation as a service providers across the darknet with a considerable footprint for information manipulation, related offers, and discussions. These operators use the same tools as any legit marketing organization. They're using branding, PR agency type work, but their goal is to bring down a competitor rather than to raise up a client. One appeal of DAS is plausible deniability. That is, the company that hires one of these groups to say, I want you to bring down this competitor, can't be connected to the disinformation campaign. There was an investigation into a Chinese propaganda campaign. The New York Times conducted this one that detailed a list of services and prices from a private contractor, including the price for registering accounts on foreign social media platforms, disguising and maintaining overseas social media accounts, and creating original videos. There was a Wired report that found it costs about $2,600 to create a fake celebrity or influencer social media account, $55,000 to discredit a journalist, and $400,000 for a 12-month political campaign designed to change people's opinions. Now, if you think this is just about politics, consider what BioNTech Pfizer has been coping with. A COVID disinformation campaign targeting them. It involved recruitment of influencers that worked to erode public confidence in their vaccine. There was a Russian disinformation campaign to undermine confidence in the company. Now, they end this post, Plotlights does, with a list of things communicators can do to prepare for and respond to disinformation as a service. Starting with a SWOT analysis without the SWO, just evaluate your threats. Understand the motivation of those targeting you. Are they trying to undermine a product? Are they trying to create doubt about the company? Are they trying to move your share price one way or the other? Listen in all directions, which means monitoring the dark corners of the web. That could mean contracting with somebody new because your current monitoring service just doesn't go there. Responding promptly and proactively, and creating a recovery plan when one of these disinformation campaigns is launched. Fascinating and scary stuff, Neville.
It is, and why should we be surprised at this? This actually is a useful article to highlight stuff we kind of know of, but not specifics, and now we're seeing some specific. It actually reminds me, this whole thing of running a disinformation campaign. And I will call it out as that, because that's what I think it is what the UK government is starting at the moment in fact, they've hired M&C Saatchi to run this campaign that is intended to help people understand why encryption in messaging is a bad thing that lets perverts get hold of children. And this is a campaign that's about to start running. There's £500,000 being budgeted for it, according to reports I've seen. It seems to me that this is disinformation. Anyone with an ounce of common sense, of course I'm biased because I think it's a bad thing that what they're doing, is out there saying this is a bad thing. You should not be doing this. And I tweeted to Morrison and to M&C Saatchi saying, to protect your reputation, don't get involved in this propaganda stunt, is what I'm calling it. Is disinformation. Truly, I find it extraordinary that this government is party to this. But that would be in this list. It's not started yet, so it may not be so bad, but that would be in this list.
But there is another initiative in another country. In Sweden, they've established the Psychological Defense Agency specifically to fight fake news. That's how serious the problem has become. They're focusing on foreign threat actors, not those spreading false information within Sweden, but they think it's serious enough that they've established a federal agency to address it.
Yeah. I mean, I think Plotline's conclusion on the takeaways in the article, Shell, it says it quite well. Deception is not new, they say. It's just become more sophisticated. Absolutely right. So I think the operation to spread it has become a business in its own right. I mean, absolutely right, leveraging social media. You see it almost daily on a tiny scale. of people, individuals, doing stuff because they don't like something, or that they're banging on somebody's point of view with a different point of view. But this is, as you outlined at the very beginning, quoted from their article at the very start, misinformation, propaganda, rumors at scale. And so the kind of recommendations to communicators on what can be done is definitely something to pay attention to, on listening in all directions, particularly understanding what motivates people like this. If you can get to that stuff, but listen, pay attention to what's being said about the things you care about at all times. That doesn't mean you stick the intern to monitor Twitter. There's sophisticated tools you can get a hold of to do this too, that work for good. And there are increasingly agencies and others who are part of the good guy brigade who will help you with this kind of thing. But it definitely needs to be on your to-do list.
Yeah, it's interesting in terms of the response. There was one piece of content that I saw. I noted that there's a ton of stuff that I see now on misinformation, disinformation. And what they did was question whether it's worth fighting the spread of misinformation, or is it better spending our time supporting the acceptance of reliable information. There's an academic group that did some research on the question and concluded that we ought to be spending more time improving the acceptance of reliable information. It doesn't mean you shouldn't deal with information being shared about your company, your leaders, products and services and the like, but, should we be out there actively looking for disinformation to fight, or should we be shining a light on quality information? A couple other items that crossed my feed that I just want to summarize very quickly here. One is the fact that scientists are getting more active on Twitter and other platforms to defend accurate information. I thought that was interesting. Politico did a study. Some of our listeners may not like this. They said the biggest spreaders of information when it comes to vaccines and politics are a small subset of conservatives. Conservatives in general have a greater tendency to share misinformation than liberals, but the people in the subset doing the most damage share two psychological traits: low levels of conscientiousness and an appetite for chaos. And then
I would just add a note here to our UK listeners. That's American conservatives.
That's American
small
conservatives,
C.
yes.
Not the big C conservatives over here, although they might be involved too. Who knows?
Lower C conservatives in the US. And just to wrap this discussion up, here's what three experts said to expect in 2022 when it comes to disinformation. This from an article published in Scientific American. One, it's going to get worse unless it gets regulated. Two, the divides and cynicism among people consuming information is going to grow. That's not the people spreading it, but the people consuming it. And three, the use of misinformation as a propaganda tool will increase, which means I guess there will be more people offering disinformation as a service. Exciting times, huh?
Yeah, it actually really throws a spotlight on somehow, and I just this in my mind, so I've not got an answer to this. Knowing that the information you as a communicator pay attention to is genuine, is authentic, and so it means knowing the sources. It means knowing where you get your information from, how reliable and trustworthy is the source. Of course, it opens up other possibilities that you may be confident in that source and they may be confident, but where they get their information from may be. So you've got this chain, it's like a supply chain almost, but you need to spend greater due diligence on those connections than otherwise might be the case, because there are very bad actors out there. And you've got to be aware of that.
You've got to be aware, and you also have to have the processes in place to address it when you find it. This is everything from being able to put other things aside to deal with it and come up with a plan, and the process is to get whatever approvals you need in a heartbeat. This can't be business as usual.
So it can't be business as usual as well in the field of journalism, I would say. That's our next story. That we're actually at a time, but lots of interesting research being published. And recently, the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism published their latest report on journalism, media, and technology trends and prediction 2022, focused primarily on mainstream media publishers and those who practice the profession of journalism. But there's a lot in there that is of direct interest to communicators generally. And it's a huge document. It rivals Edelman's Trust Barometer's 72-page PDF. It's big, but it's definitely interesting. If you're in journalism or interested in that, this is definitely worth a look. This is, just to give you the context, 246 news leaders, they describe this as people they talked to, surveyed them in 52 countries, including 57 editors-in-chief, 53 CEOs or managing editors, and 31 heads of digital or innovation. So there's a group of people who kind of know what they're talking about, I would say. The website journalism.co.uk had a good summary of 9 trends from this report. They kind of distilled them down into 9. They're very good. We're not going to go through all 9. We don't have time for that. But let me pluck out a handful just to share some data with you. The first one, which I think is valid, subscriptions and memberships are the number one priority for the media. Although news consumption has fallen in 2021 in many countries, including the UK and the US, the majority of publishers surveyed by Reuters, 73% in fact, are looking forward to 2022. The main reason is that journalists feel their work is more valued by the public. And after 2 years of uncertainty, more than half of the surveyed publishers, 59% in fact, experienced revenue growth. So green shoots is really what they're saying. Why does it matter? Well, there's not enough money and people willing to pay for news in the world to sustain all the media outlets. So we're talking now about subscription fees. Although nearly 4 in 5 publishers say that subscription is their priority in 2022, many look for a mixed model with display and native advertising, events and sponsored activities from platforms. So it's not as simple as it might seem. Another one, mainstream media will poach talent back from platforms. I know a number of journalists, you do as well, Sean, we've talked about this before, that in recent years, a lot of journalists have been leaving work as working for a mainstream medium and setting up their own businesses on Substack and other paid-for platforms. But not all of them have found success. Well, that shouldn't be a surprise. The mainstream news outlets should see some of that talent returning to the newsroom in the year to come, according to Reuters, although publishers may need to allow independent creators to continue with their podcasts and newsletters at the same time. Another trend could see star journalists group into collectives to monetize large audiences they have amassed on social channels. That's an interesting avenue to go down, I think. The third one, podcasts, newsletters, and digital videos are even more important, or will be in 2022. To boost audience engagement, 4 in 5 surveyed publishers plan to invest in podcasts and other digital audio, followed by newsletters, 70%, and digital video format, 63%. Tech investments, such as applications for voice and metaverse, are largely not seen as priorities. Social platforms are also investing in new audio creation or curation tools, which opens up the content creation market to anyone with a smartphone. This will create tougher competition, but also stimulate overall audio content consumption. Moderation will add additional challenges, since audio is even harder to monitor than written text. Live video is also enjoying a renaissance, partly because of virtual events during the pandemic and news events like the storming of the US Capitol in January 2021. Short-form video thrives thanks to apps like TikTok, which now reaches 1 billion users worldwide, as well as Snapchat. But as Reuters previously found, it is mostly influencers and celebrities that users follow. So it is not quite clear how these platforms are going to be of use to journalists. What that means is that publishers are still eager to reach younger audiences who are also major users of short video platforms. About a half of surveyed publishers plan to put more efforts into Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube and focus less on Twitter and Facebook. But independent creators may overtake journalists in this space too. It's a lively marketplace. And the final thing I always want to pull out from this is a passing reference to the metaverse. It's a topic we've talked about quite a bit in recent shows, and this is on the media's radar too, in the context of what Reuters survey shows. We may see more interviews done in metaverse featuring featuring avatars of the participants, according to Reuters. But it's safe to say journalists are not jumping on the concept just yet. The main exception are sports broadcasters who are adopting mixed reality studios that allow hosts to interact with virtual content and bring in celebrities from remote locations. Finally, more organizations may want to experiment with NFTs. We talk about NFTs? We do. Indeed, we do. Following the success of publishers like Quartz, South China Morning Post, or the New York Times that raised $860,000 from the sale of NFTs. So we're seeing those are experiments. We're seeing that a lot. As we discussed in the recent short form episode of this show, the Selfridges department store in London setting up buying NFTs in the store, not just virtually. That's a big experiment. Others are doing the same, and retail seems to be taking a big plunge here. So this, to me, is an optimistic assessment of what the landscape looks like for the media in 2022.
It's fascinating and so relevant to communicators, especially those doing media relations, thinking about what is earned media. Where do you go to get that earned media? I'm involved in an effort right now where I work to get some coverage for a market that we're entering. And after looking at this report, I'm going, why aren't we pitching podcasts that are dedicated to that region? Right? Why aren't we trying to get into the newsletters that people are producing in that region, reaching out to the people who are producing the media that's being consumed that may be outside the scope of what we think of as traditional media? Yeah, I mean, there's no question that traditional media is suffering greatly from lost subscribers. I actually subscribe to several publications that I don't read on a daily basis. It's more of a donation to make sure that they can continue doing what they do. But a lot of people won't do that. They're going to the free media sources that provide them with that confirmation bias that so many people like these days. But we talked about NFTs. You mentioned it in this report. We did the shorter form episode a little bit ago about the Associated Press selling their photography as NFTs, and they're going to take the money that they get from that and pump it back into more photography. But I could see newspapers selling their photography and other assets as an alternative source of revenue to keep the news operation going. And I think, the mainstream media need to consider, the big ones are already doing it, podcasts and newsletters. But I think the smaller ones need to do that too. One of the greatest losses in journalism has been local news. The reporters who would sit at the school board meetings and the zoning commission meetings and report on that. And these agencies are now able to operate in impunity without any public oversight because these publications are gone or they've gotten so small that they don't have the resources to go sit there. So why not engage with a passionate citizen who goes in there and distribute their newsletter that contains that information? I think there's so many opportunities out of these new channels for journalism to look at, but also for us in media relations to pitch the podcasts and the newsletters and the like.
You're right. And indeed, we could spend the rest of this episode discussing this because you've raised a really interesting point about local journalism, because that here in the UK, similar, I think, in many ways to what you've experienced in the US, we're seeing the death of local journalism in a big way. Not
really
dead,
sad.
Not death. Yeah, not dead at all, but death and a different way things are happening now. So your point was a valid one. Have someone go to the school board meeting. Therein lies the issue. There is no someone anymore because they've been let go. What I'm seeing, and indeed, you can pick up any local, well, not pick up the paper, read it online, any local newspaper in this country. I think probably a dozen I've read, and I do read quite a few. The local ones where I live, I do certainly. There's something a bit off about the writing, and some of the syntax is not quite there. The grammar's not really right. These are auto-generated posts. So some of the language is obvious that no human being would write this. So are we seeing, and I don't have the answer.
Well, we talked about Jarvis, the AI tool.
Well, no, this is not Jarvis, because that's good. This is bad. This is actually bad automated writing. It's not good. So I don't know what tools they use. I know some of them are doing this because it's no secret. I mean, this is nothing secret about any of this. But the quality of the journalism, should I call it that even, if it's auto-written, is not good, what I have observed in local press up and down the UK. But that's interesting nevertheless, because herein is the crux of a potential discussion, I'm sure, that you could argue, well, actually, we don't have a someone. to send to a school board meeting. And indeed, we don't need to. We've got the Autobot who could take that. Who could
just from the minutes of the meeting that are published publicly by the government agency.
Right, and create an article. We're seeing that happening, and I happen to believe that's got terrific potential when it's done right. But just a final word on this, because again, the point you raise is what's influencing my thinking here, that this publishers keep going, the podcasts and the video and all those things that returning journalists have set up whilst they're away, and you've hired them back again, or they come back into the profession properly. Don't stop them. Mainly because I suppose that what would work then is that according to Reuters Institute of Journalism Research, it's mostly influencers and celebrities that users follow. In which case, you could, if they are reading some of this stuff, there's an avenue to connect with those people. So I guess the point I'm making is that, like many things with regard to social, let's focus on the word social in the phrase social media. And don't think of this as the kind of formalized, structured approach that you are used to. This is informal social communication. So that journalist who started a Substack newsletter and he's got 643 subscribers, do something to support him. I don't necessarily mean money. Publicize him, amplify him, showcase him, use his stuff. And there you've got a niche channel. And life like this, in my view, is all about lots of niche channels, right?
Right. And that was another thought I had as you were running down the results of this report, was the journalists who are having trouble making a go of it with a Substack newsletter or a podcast doesn't surprise me, because they're journalists. They're not marketers. They don't know how to market this stuff, most of them, if they don't already have a following that they brought with them from the publication they worked for. But I like the idea of some sort of a collective of those. I mean, we have the FIR podcast network. Jason has the marketing podcast network. Why not a network of journalists who are producing these things around? It could be around a geographic region. It could be around a theme. But let's get the best of the Substack newsletters and podcasts and videos and put them in one place where people can go find it, just like they find stories at the New York Times or CNN or wherever.
Great idea.
Greetings, Shell, Neville, and FR listeners all around the world. It's Dan York coming at you from a extremely cold Shelburne, Vermont, where it started out the day at minus 11 Fahrenheit or minus 24 Celsius. Either way, that's cold. But I want to talk about first Twitter Spaces. Recently made recording now available to everyone. Now, again, in the social audio space, Clubhouse has now had this for a bit, but this is Twitter and Twitter Spaces. And now you can go and just, when you go to set up a space, you can record. Now, when you're done, you can change the title to reflect what you might actually talk about. You could edit the start time. You could delete the recording, of course, and you can also share it out to Twitter. Also, the links that you had perhaps promoting the space will all now point to that recording. It's pretty neat. You can listen to it, unfortunately, only for 30 days. And that's been some feedback I've said is like, it would be great if you could record it and keep it longer. There's also no way to download it right now. You can, of course, play it, from an iPhone or something directly into another device or a recorder or something like that. You could get it from your data archive if you archived all your data off, perhaps. That's something somebody suggested. I haven't tried yet. But the key is it would be great if you could actually record it, because then you could use the space as a place to do, a podcast recording, bring in additional guests, do different kinds of things like that, and be able to do it. I would note, too, it is playable on the web. So you can have somebody in the web interface go there. There are some additional controls to jump forward a few seconds and to alter the speed. You also, again, Twitter Spaces has a cool feature of the transcription, the closed captions element, which is great. And you can also see any tweets you might have shared through that. But jumping from Twitter Spaces, something new, to something really old, there was an article this past week in the New Yorker about how Tumblr is making a comeback. Tumblr. I know, Shell, you use a link blog on Tumblr, but Tumblr for many of us may not have been something we've been paying attention to. For me, myself, I looked in my Tumblr account. I had really used it back in 2010, 2011, but I really haven't done anything at all. But the point of the article was that, it says, but it might be rising once more. Tumblr's very status as a relic of the internet, easily forgotten, unobtrusively designed, more or less unchanged from a decade ago, is making it appealing to prodigal users as well as new ones. And talking about nearly half of the platform's active users and 61% of its new ones are all Generation Z, of younger population. That's what Facebook and Instagram are losing. So it's really interesting to see this. To go back in time, Tumblr was, of course, founded in 2007, and it was acquired by Yahoo in 2013 for like $1 billion. And then Verizon acquired Yahoo in 2017. And then in 2019, Tumblr was actually acquired by Automatic, the company behind WordPress.com and supporting a lot of the WordPress growth, for apparently only like $3 million or so. But the stats that they referred to say about 11 million posts a day, which is tiny compared to 500 million daily tweets. But it does have some things, it's a chronological feed, just a basic river of content. There's no algorithm. It's undated. It's a little bit quirkiness. Like, when you launch the iOS app, it says, it's all about culture, art, chaos, explore mind-blowing stuff. And there's enclaves, there's niches that are thriving there. It's interesting. I resurrected mine, danyork.tumblr.com, and I started to play with it a little bit. And it is nice that you've got a bunch of different media types, different ways to go and do it. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see what our listeners think. Will you investigate Tumblr again? Is it a way to reach different, newer, younger people, audiences? What's there? The good news for me, though, is that it's now owned by Automatic, who I trust as a company to do, because they're really doing a lot of different things to look at how do we democratize publishing? How do we make publishing available to more people? How do we enable people to discover and find content in interesting ways? And they're much more of a open internet kind of company versus Verizon or Yahoo. So I think Tumblr's in a good place. We'll have to see where it goes. But anyway, the young ones are apparently using Tumblr more, and some of us may have forgotten about that. So do check it out. Interestingly, Instagram is also talking about rolling out a chronological feed. So not a replacement for what they do now algorithmically, but an additional view. Instagram's been doing a lot of stuff. No word on timing yet, just other than the fact that it's something they're looking at and developing. They're doing a couple of other things, though. One thing is they just rolled out, or they're in the process of rolling out, subscriptions where people could subscribe to a creator, to somebody on Instagram, and get additional content. It said that they're just testing this right now with a handful of U.S. creators. But primarily, if somebody paid a monthly fee to subscribe, the creator could broadcast exclusive live streams that are only available for subscribers, could have exclusive stories that are just there, and story stickers and things that you could really have just that engaged, the tiny engaged people there. Well, maybe not tiny, depending on you could substantially use this as a way to generate income in some way, and subscriber badges, those kind of things like that. They're doing it. Word also came this week that TikTok is exploring, looking at how they could enable you to have these subscriptions. This follows, of course, that this has been available on Facebook for a bit, and it's also something that Twitter just came out with in the terms of their super follows. And all of these, of course, are seeing things like the newsletter world, where there have been subscriber bases and many other places like that. So very interesting to see how this all goes. Instagram's been doing one more thing, which is also thinking about NFTs, Nifties, whatever you want to call them. And the word was that Meta is going to be looking at how users can create and sell NFTs on Facebook, use them as profile pictures, everything else, which comes at the same moment when, just this past couple of days, Twitter has allowed that under the Twitter Blue subscription, where you pay $3 a month, you could use an NFT as your profile photo. And in fact, they will give you a little bit of a hexagonal picture for your profile. Nothing prevents you, of course, from making a hexagonal picture yourself, but these will be special ones or in some way. And already we've had lots of people saying, well, great, this allows me to go and block everybody who's involved with Web3 crypto kind of things, but we'll see. Anyway, that's the big news coming out of all of this. I'm skeptical, as I've said a number of times, but we'll see. It's at least looking at where this all goes from this. I would point people to a great piece written by Charlie Wartzel, who writes the Galaxy Brain newsletter, which is now part of The Atlantic, where he talks about, he headlines it as Builder Brain, talking about, synthetic uteruses, Web3, and Wordle, but more talking about this mindset that is, we can build our way out of things rather than fixing the things that exist, and pointing out that in the Web3 effort, we're already seeing people running into the same challenges like content moderation, like ease of use, like centralization, all of these things that are already happening. It's well worth a read, and I'll have a link for that. With that, I'm going to wrap this up. I would encourage people to join us on the Thursday Communicator calls, 30 minutes of conversations at 1 p.m. It's a great way to just have a check-in with other communicators throughout the week. Just one little time of social conversation, and it's very nice like that. You can find more of my audio and writing at danyork.me, and thanks for listening. Back to you, and I'm going to try to stay warm.
Well, thanks, Dan. Always an interesting report, he said, having not listened to it yet as we record. I know what he's talking about. He sent us the list. And Twitter Space is opening up to everybody and being recordable. Absolutely something we're looking at where I work. So, lots of great stuff there, Dan. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
Yeah, I think the topic on Twitter Blue allowing profile pictures of NFTs, NFTs in your picture profile, I see a lot of kind of guffawing going on in many in the online community. I think this is actually a very smart move by Twitter. I think it brings it out into more of an open area than making it specialist. This is a burgeoning area, and I think things like this add to the overall development of interest and awareness of what's going on. That stimulates.
I see the snide and cynical remarks about pretty much every NFT story that comes out, but every NFT story that comes out simply adds to the total, which suggests that it continues to go mainstream and be more accepted. So, I think all the people who are saying, "Oh, this is just a flash in a pan and a fad," it's going to evolve. No. It may not look like it does now at some point, but it's not going anywhere.
And some of it won't survive at all, without doubt. But hey, that's the nature of this exciting marketplace of experimentation going on. There's going to be some terrible mistakes people are going to make, and there'll be some disasters along the way. But look at the successes. I mean, one of the things I think fascinate me all the time is the attention I'm paying. I discover some new thing that's happening that someone's doing, not just with NFTs, by the way. It's across the whole, I've got to mention it, Web3 space. But it is interesting what's going on, and it's hard to push away all the bullshit and the hype that's going on, truly. And there's a huge amount of that. And try and find the gems. And there are gems to look for in terms of what people are learning and what they're sharing about the learning, what we're seeing happening. So is this in that area? I don't know. I don't really know. Is it a marketing ploy by Twitter, as some are saying? Probably. But it adds to the body of knowledge, is what I think. And will it stimulate something else like it to happen? It could be.
Yeah, it adds to the body of knowledge, but also to the general visibility of NFTs. You're just going to see them everywhere now.
And the hype.
Also, Dan reported on growing resurgence of Tumblr, which I find interesting. I've never stopped using it, but I use it for my link blog. I can't say that I look at anybody others.
I've still got a Tumblr account. I've not been in it for 5 years. I should. I'll take a look at it. I will. I'll take a look.
You've been to Second Life more recently than you've been to Tumblr, huh?
I was in Second Life last weekend. It was fun. Yeah.
Well, one of the truths that we can say about the social media space is that success breeds replication. We've seen that time and time again, especially with stories. Stories had their start on Snapchat before Instagram appropriated the idea. But there are stories on Facebook and scads of other social media platforms. A few years ago, we reported on a service that lets you create your own stories and embed them on any website that you like, just using iframe. I think it was called Apester, and it's still around. I checked it out a couple of months ago. It's still there. You can still do this. Now comes word that TikTok is testing out TikTok stories. Well, of course they are. What they're going to do with stories, rather than have them as everybody else does at the top of the screen as a separate part of the interface, is they're going to integrate them into the main feeds, the For You and the Following feeds in the TikTok app, rather than separating them out. That way they just become another content option, letting users create multi-frame sequences of clips and still images that users would still be able to view in stream just like any other clip. Only difference? They're gone after 24 hours. Stories are also going to get a blue story marker on the first frame and an indicator at the bottom of the screen that will tell you how many total frames there are in the story. You then tap on the video to move to the next frame. That'll be a new user interface experience for TikTok users. But that's not the only copycat news. We reported on Clubhouse when it launched. We talked about it several times, and then about Twitter Spaces. Clubhouse has been really deteriorating lately, but Twitter Spaces is definitely rising. That's Twitter's Clubhouse clone. Now LinkedIn is getting into the game. It's launching an audio-only product this month in beta, and they'll have a video version of it later in the spring. I haven't heard that Twitter or Clubhouse are looking at any video, so that'll be an additional feature on the LinkedIn service. LinkedIn product manager named Jake Poses said, and I'm quoting now, "We want to make it easier to host virtual roundtables, fireside chats, and more. Some may want the event to be more formal or less formal. Some might want to communicate with their audience to open up the floor. We're giving professionals interactivity and support." Dude, that's Clubhouse. This version will be part of a new events platform that LinkedIn is developing that will include tools to run interactive content end-to-end with no need to use any third-party software. That's marketing hype right there. You'll be able to record and run a complete event with tools for online attendees and hosts to speak to each other in live conversations and to moderate discussions, and for attendees to communicate to each other both during and after the events take place. They'll also help you get the word out about your event. You know that COVID has produced a huge demand for virtual events, and now that we've been doing a lot of those, it's probably not going to deteriorate much as the pandemic recedes. I mean, big conferences will, CES, right? The National Association of Broadcasters, the big conferences, even IABC are going to go back to in-person, but smaller ones and ones that may not have existed without the ability to bring people in virtually, those will continue to thrive. So LinkedIn may be onto something here that the others have missed.
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me. And in fact, I would say that those smaller ones you referenced there, or not just them, but the bigger ones too, will have hybrids, a real-world conference with an element for those who don't want to or can't travel to participate in some of the events virtually. But it's going to be more integrated, more a part of it, as opposed to what you've had recently is like a bolt-on. That isn't at all like the experience people are getting. This is where a metaverse will come into play, Shell. So I can see this is a good move by LinkedIn, I think. I mean, they're talking about creators, and everyone's talking about creators. That word, get used to it. We're creators. So you can do interesting things there. The TikTok one is very distinct to that audience, with the stuff that disappears after 24 hours. But I think, the Clubhouse experience, I've only ever used Clubhouse twice, I have to say, and both of those were to listen to or participate in things that not pleasant experiences in my book, unfortunately. But so I don't miss it. But I think these are settling down. So, people are learning from what these guys did. Now they're trying that. I think Twitter Spaces is really good, I have to say, based on my own experience there. This I'd be interested in. I don't really spend a lot of time in LinkedIn, and maybe something like this would make me do that.
Yeah, and again, I think in Clubhouse and in Twitter Spaces, there are users who have set up recurring events or special events that they have promoted, but it's been outside of the service that Spaces or Clubhouse offer. There's nothing that says host your event in Clubhouse. LinkedIn is saying host your event in LinkedIn, and we're going to give you Clubhouse-like functionality, including video, which you don't get on Clubhouse or Twitter Spaces, just for your event here in LinkedIn. I think that's a really smart move on their part.
I agree. No, it's interesting developments, and I bet you'll be talking about this again soon. Okay, our next topic is about, communicating authentically. I talk a lot about authentic communication, where that's meaning mostly the way in which you conduct your messaging and your outreach to people outside your organization. So I distill it down in a simple way, which is don't talk like a marketing brochure, talk like a person talking to another person in your communication. Be authentic. Of course, it's a deeper meaning to the word authentic than that's rather a surface view. And an article in the Harvard Business Review published just a few days ago really caught my attention. Communicating Authentically in a Virtual World is the title of this piece by Andrew Brodsky. He's an assistant professor of management at McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. And he's done some research, and it's quite depth research. We're not going to go into that in detail in this report, but it's worth taking a look at the whole of this if you're that interested. But in summary, what Professor Brodsky's writing about is this: authenticity. He says it's important at work, we know, but sometimes it's challenging to identify and maintain. Plus, what if the authentic emotions you're feeling conflict with the message you're trying to convey to colleagues or employees? When is it useful to lean into authenticity, and when is inauthenticity actually a better strategy? Research on how people perceive authenticity during in-person, email, and phone conversations sheds some light on how to navigate this issue, particularly amidst hybrid work. I mean, that's a terrific assessment of what his research has produced in terms of outcomes. He talks about other research studies that also affirm the importance of authenticity as a key driver of overall work outcomes for everyone, from frontline workers to leaders. Alternatively, being perceived as inauthentic has been shown to destroy trust and relationships, damage customer loyalty, worsen performance evaluations, and decrease organizational profits. Yet, despite the importance of authenticity, it can be challenging to develop and maintain. Take communication. While being perceived as authentic is ideal, actually always behaving authentically can lead to disaster. Imagine a manager who, while laying off an employee, expresses underlying happiness because her soon-to-be spouse just accepted a marriage proposal that morning. Or an executive sending out a message about a new company diversity initiative, but doing so in a dour tone because his child just dropped out of college. In these cases, being inauthentic by hiding underlying authentic emotions may be done with a pro-social motivation to benefit others, with the realization that true authenticity may not be appropriate for the context. This creates a potential bind, whereby leaders are often faced with a choice to either display emotions that they may not be feeling, as required by their job or as a means of benefiting others, at the risk of being punished for being perceived as inauthentic, or be authentic and risk being punished for displaying inappropriate emotions. How can leaders navigate this tricky situation, particularly in a hybrid work environment? He then goes on in this article, it's at some length, to talk about the research that he conducted to answer some of those questions. And it is quite significant, the research. It's definitely worth a look. He concludes, which is the bit I'm going to reference, on 3 takeaways you can use in your own work life. If you're grappling with this, now you've heard that preamble to it all, you now might be grappling with the question. So the first one, if you're communicating authentically, try to use the richest communication medium available, e.g. face-to-face or video conferencing. Second, if you are communicating inauthentically, for example, you need to suppress emotions not appropriate for an interaction. On average, it appears best to utilize telephone or audio communication in order to appear most authentic. Third, if you have to use email to relay emotions that you want to be perceived as authentic, find a way to make it clear that you didn't make the choice on purpose, or that the choice was for a positive reason, to help reduce the attribution that it was low effort. The findings from the professor's studies indicate that it isn't using email that makes emotions seem inauthentic by itself, but rather that this cost is driven by the recipient believing that you chose to use email. For instance, if you're congratulating someone on a big promotion, you could tell them that you can't wait to celebrate in person, but wanted to congratulate them the moment you heard. One overarching finding, the professor says in concluding his piece, is clear from the research, however. Communication media often relays more than we realize, whether it's due to emotion cues leaking through or recipients making evaluations based on our choice of communication mode. As more and more of workplace interactions shift to virtual, it's becoming ever more important to be mindful of the communication choices we make and their possible unintended consequences. Lot there, Shel. What do you reckon?
There is, and I'm not sure I agree with most of it.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah, I knew it.
The first thing that comes to my mind is the suggestion that you should fake authenticity.
He calls it being inauthentic.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think you can compartmentalize. If I've had a bad experience at home, it doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic in my praise of the colleague for whom I'm conducting, say, a performance evaluation who's been doing a great job. I don't have to let what happened at home interfere with authentic engagement with that person. I just compartmentalize. I'll get back to feeling crummy about what happened at home later, right?
But he's saying that some people can't do that well, or don't think about how to do it.
They need to get trained then how to do that. Because, I mean, I find fascinating this person's distinction about what you should use email and face-to-face for. I'm reading a book right now on how to lead in a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, where everybody is a leader, essentially. If you're all in there, you're all equal because it's decentralized. There's no hierarchy. So how do you lead on the things that you want to lead on? And what they're saying is, email and text messages don't show emotion. You don't get tone of voice, other things that help you detect what people are feeling. So get on the phone. Obviously, face-to-face may be difficult in a DAO because you're all over the world. But get on a video call, get on a call so that people can see or hear authentically how you're feeling about this. But they don't say anything about, what to do because you just got back from a bad parent-teacher meeting. The focus is on the topic at hand. And I'm busy talking to managers in our organization about how to manage a hybrid team when we all get back into the workplace. It's going to be 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. So there are going to be people that you might reach out to just because they're in the office next door and I don't have to get on a call or send a text in order to bring them in. So, authenticity is sort of bound up in this idea that I have to be authentic with everybody, whether they're local or remote. But I don't think that I would distinguish authenticity or say that it is inauthentic if I am not allowing my emotions from something extraneous to work to influence the way I behave with people at work.
I get it. I do, but he's saying it differently. Do I hear?
You hear my dog?
Yeah. Okay.
That's the fun of podcasts, right? Is the ambient sounds.
Absolutely. I think she had a question. So
she also doesn't like this whole authenticity thing. So.
No, quite. No. I mean, I found this an interesting article. I'm not sure I was trying to get my head around this whole notion of, if you are communicating inauthentically. My immediate reaction is, well, don't communicate inauthentically. But I can see the examples he made and how that could impact someone.
I'll give you an example.
You've had some wonderful news in the example he gave about the spouse accepting your marriage proposal. And you're about to do something bad to a worker, dismiss them or fire them or something. And yet you've had this amazing thing happening. So you're probably distracted. So would it be better actually to postpone that if you can? I don't know. I mean, this raises questions like that to me.
Let me give you an example. Yeah. I got laid off from a job. And I got this news just as I was getting ready to leave to go do a speaking engagement. And I went and did the speaking engagement. And I don't think I was inauthentic in my enthusiasm for what I was talking about. It was the very earliest days of digital communication. This would have been around 1993. And, in the back of my mind was, oh my God, I don't have a job. I got 2 weeks left and then I'm out of work. Yeah. And that was not something that I allowed to creep into my presentation. I maintained my enthusiasm for the topic. That was authentic enthusiasm. There was nothing inauthentic about what I presented at that talk.
I understand. So how would it have been then if you had been presenting that included something where you were talking with great pride what you'd achieved working for your current employer who just fired you?
If it was not relevant to the theme of the presentation, I would not have raised it.
Right. So I don't think there's a black and white answer to any of what this professor is saying in this piece. I think it's a wholly an it depends thing. Although I don't like the labels of being inauthentic versus being authentic.
Right.
So maybe that's the problem with what he's saying. His research is definitely, I can't judge it. Does it sound? It looks it to me, but it's detailed what he's done. And maybe it's worth reading all the research. So maybe I've summarized it with skimming two significantly important parts. So you had to read those. But to me, it's a thought provoker, what he's saying.
It definitely
here.
is.
Yeah, even if you don't agree with it. And I'm not sure I do either, but I don't disagree with it. So,
but it's out there in the Harvard Business Review, so
it is. Yeah. It's worth a look.
Well, let's pivot dramatically from that topic to labor unions, because labor unions, as Time Magazine put it, are having a moment here in the U.S. And I should point out that this is a very U.S.-centric topic that we're talking about, although what you do about it, I think, is more universal wherever you are. But, labor unions have been in retreat in the U.S. for many years. Since Reagan was in office, he was not a big fan of unions, despite the fact that he had been the president of one at one point. But the pandemic has led a lot of Americans to take another look at their working conditions, their relationship with labor, and it's led to a sort of a resurrection of the labor movement. So far, just in the past year, we've seen Google employees create their first union. We've seen a union created at a Starbucks, and others are looking to follow suit. There have been successful strikes. We went a long time without seeing strikes at big companies, and now we're seeing successful strikes where the workers got what they wanted from John Deere and Kellogg's, and Kellogg's was about to replace their striking workers with new workers, just fire them all, and that didn't go anywhere, and they ended up giving in. Even employees at Image Comics have unionized. So there's some speculation that all these millions of angry workers out there who, let's face it, workers are in the catbird seat. In the U.S., unemployment is at 3.9%. There are not a lot of people out there desperate for a job. There are 4 million open jobs. So employees are sitting in the driver's seat right now. But in the jobs they're in, a lot of them are angry. They're angry about some of them not getting hazard pay. People who work in grocery stores and hospitals, for example, during the pandemic. People who have gotten no pay raises or minuscule pay raises while they're watching their executives' wealth just skyrocket. They're upset about long work hours and all the other things that have led to the Great Resignation. Here's one telling paragraph from an article about all of this in The Nation. More than 1,577 contracts covering over 1 million unionized workers are set to expire in the United States. But that figure includes only contracts that cover more than 1,000 workers. There are plenty of other workers in smaller unionized workplaces that also have contracts expiring in 2022, including nursing homes and small hotels. 2 of the 3 states with the largest number of contracts expiring are the swing states of Pennsylvania and Ohio. If more than 1 million U.S. workers, or even fewer in key labor markets, take collective action toward common demands to radically improve the quality of life on and off the job, the results will be far more powerful than those of the Great Resignation. If even a tiny fraction of the number of people who quit in August and September of 2021 choose to unionize, forcing their employers to improve their working conditions by threatening a collective rather than an individual exit, or by withholding their labor in supermajority strikes, the working class could radically lift the floor on what is considered acceptable corporate and shareholder behavior, as the John Deere strikers did. After that article, there was one professor I read. He teaches labor and industrial relations at Cornell. He said, workers are right to think that the ball is in their court. They need to take a really big bite of the apple right now because whatever they get, they're going to have it in their mouth for a long time. So if you are an internal communicator, there are really 2 things here to consider with this, let's face it, labor movement that's going on right now. The first is how to keep your existing workers from unionizing, since unionizing is a trend. An investor relations company shared a post listing 9 things that you must communicate to employees to stay union-free. And among these are to remind them why they chose to work here in the first place, that they have as much right not to join a union as they do to join one, how they're able to communicate with leadership and essentially elevate their voice in the organization, things like this. We'll have a link to this in the show notes. I also like the idea of communicators counseling leaders about how to improve the work environment so employees don't want to strike. My late father-in-law, he owned a shipyard, and he always looked at the contracts of the shipyards around him and improved things just a little bit on every dimension of the contract. So when the unions came around to his shipyard, the employees say, your contract is not as good as what we've got, so get out of here. The only reason we have unions is because we have companies that won't give employees what they believe they are entitled to, right? So there's that. How do you communicate with employees in order to keep them from unionizing? But, there are organizations that have unions, always have. I work for a general contractor. All our subcontractors are unionized. We're a union shop. Concrete workers, carpenters, glazers, drywall professionals, you name it, they're all unionized. So, communicating with a union workforce will be an increasingly needed skill as more unions are formed. We'll have a link to another post that has some great thoughts about this, such as recognizing the changing needs of those employees who are in unions, such as the need for more skills training, especially around soft skills, identifying new channels of engagement around issues like health and wellness activities, constituency groups, community work, even social media. So, as this trend becomes what it looks like it's poised to become, which is a movement, these are all things that communicators need to be thinking very seriously and very hard about.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's actually got me thinking as well about this, contrasting, I suppose, what you've described, the picture in the United States, compared to what it is here in the UK and indeed elsewhere in Europe. Is here, organized labor happened a century ago. Manufacturing in the heyday of... Well,
in the US too, it just died in the Reagan era.
Yeah, the same thing happened here, where the peak of union power, I suppose, is the right way of describing it, was the 1970s into the 1970s. It peaked. Then came Thatcher, and everything's happened from there. I think unions have evolved in this country in a good way, it seems to me, largely, where they do provide a very beneficial resource to employers, to employees and organization. We don't have, as was the case those years ago, and indeed still is in some parts of continental Europe, unions that are calling strikes every 5 minutes. Although we do have a couple of unions in this country, particularly the transportation industry, that's what they seem to be doing all the time. Because the perspective is that because the employees are not getting what they deserve in terms of pay and benefits, etc. I don't believe that gets a lot of support, really, that argument anymore these days, given those changes we've had in the overall labour market generally, and now with the pandemic and the massive changes that have happened with the workplaces. So this, I said to you before we started recording this is a very American story. Listening to what you've just outlined, I don't think it is. The details, sure. But the role of communicators in all of this, whether you've got the Great Resignation, which is definitely in the US more than here, although it is here too, but not on the same scale, is something that communicators need to be mindful of, definitely.
And that will wrap up this episode of For Immediate Release. Our next episode will be in late February. We will release that on Monday, February 28th. I'm talking now about the monthly Hefty But Good.
The long-form show.
Right. Yeah, it's still hefty but good.
It is.
But please remember, we now have not just this one monthly episode. We have our short-form episodes, 1 or 2 of these each week. Have no idea what those will be about in the coming week, because we're talking about things that cross our news feeds that lead us to reach out and say, hey, let's get together today and talk about this. So please keep an eye on the FIR newsfeed and give a listen to these episodes that run between 10 and 15 minutes. And send us your comments on anything you heard here today or during the short form episodes by sending an email to fircomments@gmail.com. You can attach up to a 3-minute audio file if you'd like us to play it. Record a comment directly from the FIR website. We have a send voicemail tab on the right-hand side of the page. Click record, record 2, record 3, however long it takes you to get your point across. We'll stitch them together, play them, and talk about them. We, as I say, every month miss those days when listener comments drove most of the content of the show. Leave a comment directly on the show notes for this episode at firpodcastnetwork.com. Share your thoughts on the FIR community on Facebook. And we always appreciate your reviews on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check out the other podcasts on the FIR Podcast Network and the Marketing Podcast Network. And until February, that will be a 30 for this episode of For Immediate Release.